concerned maybe using opiates. That was enough for me to get, which is the truth, and that was enough for me to get the medicine.
So all you had to do was explain. You didn't have to have proof.
No.
You didn't have to have a prescription.
No, it's available without a prescription. So what the pharmacist did at that point was ran my insurance to make sure it would cover the cost, and it did. And then I had unlimited refills on that. So that if you have private insurance, that was at Walgreens. If you have private insurance, I strongly encourage you. It's worth the trip to. I was in there anyway, picking up another prescription for another one of my kids. So I thought, let's see if this works out.
Did you try
it? And it didn't take any longer. It didn't add to my time.
And it's mainly for opioids.
This is only going to reverse the effects of opioids. But if there's someone in your family using drugs, you may not know what they're using, right? So even if you're concerned that they may be using opioids, that should be enough to cause your insurance company to cover it. Yeah.
How much does it cost without insurance?
That's a good question. So they tell us the retail is anywhere between $80 and $120. Is that right? So kind of just like anything else, depends where you get it. It is available at any pharmacy without a prescription. You don't have to have insurance to get it. Like I said, if you're prescribed opiates, or if there's a family member that may be using opiates. Those were all justify the insurance covering that medicine.
To be clear, you said it's OTC, over the counter?
It's in a gray area, so it's still a prescription, but it's available without a prescription. The way that you get it is going through one of these teaching like this. So you can either do it in here, and right before we give out the Narcan, we do the teaching, or at a pharmacy. The pharmacy is really fast.
Yeah. Is it available at Phoenix Center as well, if someone were to come to you?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. We do a community Narcan training twice a month, one in the morning and one in the afternoons. The first Wednesday is the morning.
Third Wednesdays in the evening and fourth Wednesdays in the morning.
Okay.
But if people show up, as long as one of us, and there's several of us who are able to train, then someone calls us, we're gonna not make them wait till that third or fourth Wednesday.
There's also a flyer over there on you guys' whiteboard too.
All right.
So we brought some with us.
So,
we can
who needs some Narcan?
get it out there.
Narcan here now. Who needs Narcan? Narcan. Over here, Narcan. It's like at a baseball game. If you're out there watching, we're doing community distribution of Narcan. Thank you to our friends at the Phoenix Center. Let's give them a hand, please. So we'll get started on the regular group here in a couple minutes. If you're out there watching. In the meantime, guys, I'm also going to pass around this sign-in sheet. If you don't mind giving us your name and phone number, email, we can keep in touch with you.
Even if you filled it out.
Yeah, if you just sign in, though, you don't have to do it again.
What if a kid was at home? They tell us this is safety. They say that's okay. I mean, I was still always in control to make sure.
That will harm somebody who hasn't taken it.
You don't want to let them get a hold of it, but we have been told that this is safe to give the children. Sure. They tell us it's safe to get it safe. This is a safe dose for a child. So if a child got home, it's a child.
All right, guys, in the meantime, hey, thanks for coming, everybody. Again, Phoenix Center, what are the Wednesdays again?
The third Wednesday of the month at 6:30 at night, and the fourth Wednesday of the month at 9:30 in the morning.
And we'll have them come back here too, hopefully. But if you're looking at, or you know anyone who needs to get Narcan, get over there, get trained, and then you can have your own supply. Answer any questions you have about the medication as well. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. All right. So we're going to get the show on the road tonight. Now tonight I'm going to try to do a lot on self-care and a lot on positive psychology. So if you're new to this, and you know, I gave a bunch of information last week on what is substance use disorder, how do you respond to it, what are the different ways that you can intervene. I'm certainly willing to answer questions that come up in that regard. But tonight I want to focus also, I want to make sure we take a little bit of time to talk about stress management and how do you deal with this issue yourselves. I'm going to talk about it from a trauma point of view. When you look at family recovery, you look at family behaviors, let's just put it that way. People live together under one house and everybody learns how to do certain things and you learn how to respond. Even if it's the wrong thing to do, it sort of becomes the thing to do. There really is no such thing as a normal family. We've talked about this in here before. The news media, the TV shows, it's going to be Christmas time soon. All the Christmas commercials will be on. Now, you guys know, I told you the secret there, right? Those commercials exist for one reason and one reason only, to make you feel like crap about yourselves as a parent or a husband or a wife or a person in general, so that you go buy shit to make yourself feel better. This is the basis of the American economy. It's way beyond buying what we need. We buy things for psychological reasons these days. And the fundamental message of every commercial is, you're not doing right, you're not good enough, you're not a good enough husband, you're not a pretty enough woman, you're not a handsome enough man, you don't have your act together enough, and so go buy something and feel better. The way that translates in family recovery is it creates this myth, this mythical idea that there's a family out there that everything's going really well for. That the kids have graduated from high school, they've graduated from college. There really hasn't been a misstep along the way. It's sort of like they got everything tuned up. Now, they do have some problems. On a Hallmark movie, there are always some problems, right? There's just enough tension to make it interesting. And then it always ends with people stringing popcorn together and singing Christmas carols. And I'll be like, that never happened in my family. Not once. We might have been stringing some stuff together. Let your imagination on what that was. And we weren't singing Christmas carols. So this idea of how do we deal with this? How do we deal with the stress? How do we deal with the bad feelings that associate this? We said last week that there are just some straight up tough things about dealing with substance use, right? Very, very difficult stuff. It's a dangerous, dangerous world right now. The fact that the Phoenix Center came here tonight and talked about the distribution of Narcan, that's an example of this. This is new stuff, guys. This wasn't going on, even though I've worked in this field for almost 20 years, it wasn't going on for the majority of my career, so it's tough. You have enough real things to be worrying about. What we want to try to do is help you move beyond that into a place where you can not be okay with things, but you can be a little bit better. And that's the goal of tonight. I've told you a little bit about who I am. So I'm a therapist. I have a master's degree in sociology. I have an MBA. I have all these other credentials, but I'm also a person in recovery myself. So for me, it's been 19 years. An opioid use disorder via pills, old school, kind of like prescription drug addiction, prescription narcotics. I was in a car accident in 1999, walked out of the emergency room with 120 Darvocet, and it was game over. Now, before that, there's no question I had an alcohol problem, without a doubt. But I'm sure the alcohol thing would have not really gotten noticed for a while. It was part of the culture, part of everything that you did or that you do, and it still is for a lot of folks. I went back to school, got all these degrees to work in this field. I've spent the majority of my career working in clinical settings, private treatment centers, my own private practice. I've been an interventionist. I've been here at FAVORE for 6 years. At FAVORE, we take a little bit of a different angle. All the services are free, and that's strategic in a lot of different ways. That means everybody can afford them, but that also means we don't have to go through any of the rigmarole to figure out whether or not you qualify to be here. We don't need to figure out how are we going to build this or build that. So we want you to come here to this family group tonight, and even if you're not sure what's going on with your loved one, get some information. Maybe you are 100% sure what's going on with your loved one, get some information. This is meant to be a time to try to get all those questions answered without any strings attached. We have no agenda, guys. We don't have any back room. We don't have any other. We're not going to try to get you to go to any rehab. We're not going to try to get you to do any program. This is just 100% information. All right, so what we're doing, how many people have heard the term the elephant in the room? And if you're out there in Facebook land, remember, you can send in your questions and I'll answer those too. Just identify who you are and where you're from. So the elephant in the room is what? It's a metaphor to encourage families to talk about the thing that everybody knows is there, but nobody's talking about it. It was originally developed because a lot of folks coming to treatment, a lot of people doing this, it was usually husbands and wives, and maybe it was more for the kids to learn to talk about this, but it was this idea that everybody would just go along, do their thing, and really not say anything to each other. Now, it's unlikely that you're there. If you're here tonight, you probably have moved through this, but this is right off the jump, right off the rip, something we got to talk about, because talking about this issue and bringing it up, it's a cliche to say that that's the first step, but it's absolutely the first step. You can get nowhere with this unless you start to get clear in your mind on what you're dealing with, and then also clear in your mind on what you're willing to do about what you're dealing with. So I think everybody here probably gets that already, but I am going to talk a little bit about what addiction is then. Because we know that there's a lot of folks out there using substances. There's a lot of people having a good time, a lot of people going at it a little bit too hard, and there is no x-ray for addiction. Well, there is a PET scan, but it doesn't get used a lot. Basically, what you do is you sit down and you talk to somebody, and you try to establish whether or not there's a pattern of these behaviors. So tolerance is more and more of the substance to get the same effect, right? So I used to take 2 pills, now I take 22 pills. Withdrawal, when I don't have the substance, I'm sick. When I put it in my system, I feel better. Craving, I can't quit thinking about it. Craving is an interesting topic to talk to family members about. It's not craving like normal craving. It's 100% obsessive, ever-present craving. Almost to the point where people will talk about, I went to get high because I couldn't deal with this hamster in my head. Just go get it, go get it, go get it, go get it, go get it. It becomes uncomfortable in its own right. Inability to cut down. This is the idea that you tell somebody you love, like, look, I'm only going to drink on the weekends. But then you stretch it to Monday night, you stretch it to Wednesday night, so on and so forth. Inability to control. I'm going to go out and have 4 beers. I go out and have 44 beers. I wake up 3 days later in Las Vegas with Mike Tyson and a tiger. Anybody know what movie that's from? All right. I don't know if it's appropriate to say that in family group. I know in all recovery that everybody immediately knows what that is. Physical danger. This would be if you're using the substance and you're on the substance and you're putting yourself in physical danger. Now, this gets a little bit confusing because there's also, and it's not up here, I apologize, there's also, it's technically this one, physical consequences, and you continue to use. What's the difference? This would be getting high, getting drunk, and driving a car repeatedly in a dangerous way. This would be being told that you have elevated liver enzymes and you continue to drink. Or you can make an argument that anybody using street heroin or street drugs in the opioid class right now is violating this. It's using despite the fact that there's going to be clear physical or psychological consequences, which is different than it being in danger when you're using. It's a little bit confusing. Great deal of time, it's a full-time job. You have problems at work and school. That one's obvious. Social activities, you only want to go to the party. And then interpersonal problems, people are angry at you or upset with you. If there's a pattern over a 12-month period of these behaviors, and the pattern is up to the therapist or the clinician interpreting this, we're going to be honest, this is very intuitive on the part of the person who's interpreting it, then you meet criteria for substance use disorder severe. Whatever the substance is goes at the beginning. Alcohol use disorder severe, opioid use disorder severe, anxiolytic use disorder severe, cannabis use disorder severe. So that's as close as it gets, guys, to an x-ray. That's as close as it gets to, like, how you have high blood pressure, you go and you get it done, there's a number up there, it's 150 over whatever, you have high blood pressure, you can't argue with that. It's right there in front of you. You get a blood test and you have diabetes, you can't argue with it. The problem with this is you can argue with this quite a bit, especially with certain substances. It's harder to do if it's heroin or some of these other drugs that are perceived as being the most dangerous drugs, but where it comes to alcohol, for example, it's very difficult because people will look around and they will measure themselves up against other people and they will tell you how this isn't as bad as you think. And many times they may be telling you the truth. They may be telling you something that is absolutely accurate. Any questions about the criteria? Do not go home tonight and try to diagnose your loved one. Be like, hey, come out to the kitchen table. Let's talk for a minute. I'm trying to establish a pattern of behavior around your inability to control. I don't recommend that. This is just a guideline. And then this is what it looks like if a person does cross the line into substance use disorder severe. What's going on in that picture is the neurotransmitter dopamine has been depleted. What this leads to is compulsive drug seeking. And the reason it leads to compulsive drug seeking is it's impossible to feel pleasure or contentment without dopamine. And the reason it's depleted is because you repeatedly flooded your brain with dopamine. These substances release an unusual amount of dopamine, so your brain essentially shuts it off. The analogy would be if you went home tonight and the toilet was running and the water was overflowing, what would you do? You would reach down and shut the water off. So this is your brain shutting the dopamine off. And this is what leads to the crazy drug-seeking behavior that makes everybody in this room just totally not, you totally don't understand it. You don't get it. You don't. How could you be doing this well for this period of time and go off? How could you have your job in jeopardy knowing that you're going to be drug tested but still go and use the drug? It's because there's nothing sane about the process once you cross that line. And that's called addiction. What questions do we have about that? It's impossible to know for sure. What we say is when in doubt, treat it like that's what you're dealing with. The reason why we talk about it in family group is because we want you to understand that if that's what you're dealing with in your loved one, you can't come right at them and talk them out of this. You cannot debate a person in addiction. You cannot, there's nothing you can say that's going to make them one day go, I did not think of that. I'm good to go now, Mom. I'm good to go now, wife. It won't be like that. People will respond to boundaries. They will respond to your change in your behavior. That's the only thing that they will respond to if they're at this point. Because when I got to this point, guys, all I'm doing all day, every day is assessing my situation and trying to figure out where I'm going to get the next thing. That's it. And so if people start putting roadblocks in front of me in that regard, that makes me reconsider my options. But if you come and talk to me, I mean, I'll even agree with everything you say. Toward the end, I'll tell you how you're right. I'll tell you how I'm going to get help tomorrow. I'll tell you where I'm going to go, and I've been thinking about it and all these other things. You know what I mean? I won't even argue with you. I don't know how many people's loved one has gotten to that point where they won't even argue whether or not they're addicted. They know they're addicted. The problem isn't whether or not they're addicted. The problem is, are they willing to do something about it? And this is where the boundaries come in. So we've talked a lot about boundaries. Boundaries are basically your ability to start saying no. You can get into a lot of stuff in these groups, guys, and family members will say, what should I do? How should I handle this? You probably already know what you should do. You probably know that there are some things that you can start to do different in your relationship with your loved ones. The problem isn't what do I do, it's how do I do it. How do I say no when they come back to the house and they want to stay there after I've asked them to leave and they're knocking on the door and it's cold out and the weather's starting to change? How do I not open the door? How do I not pay the rent when the grandkids are in the house and I know that if I don't pay the rent and the grandkids are there, they're all going to get kicked out? Do you guys get this? That's the stuff. How do I say no when I know I'm not sure where he's going to wind up tonight if he storms off or if she storms off? In your gut, you probably know what you should be saying. The deal is, why can't we say it? You guys get that? And that's been labeled different things over the years. Some people label that enabling. How many people have heard the word enabling? How about the word codependent? Okay, so we have a different take on it. We don't label it enabling or codependent. We do acknowledge it's a maladaptive behavior that's self-defeating. It's not good for you and it's not good for the person. So it's not a useful way to do your relationship with this person. But we would say it's based on trauma and not on codependency and enabling. And I want to talk you through that because if you know what you're dealing with, you're more likely to make a good decision. You guys get it? All right, so let's talk about trauma in the big picture first. And let's understand how the brain processes things, all right? So my background as a trauma therapist, I've been an EMDR certified trauma therapist for 3 years. And that's a different certification that is 100% all about trauma. All they talk to you about and teach you about is trauma. If you say I'm an addiction counselor, they basically say, well, whatever, addiction is just a symptom of trauma. This is how you deal with it. This is how you help people. You say like, well, I deal with depression. Depression is a symptom of trauma. You get that? Trauma therapists are very much tied to the idea that trauma is the root of all of our problems. I don't know what you guys think about that. I mean, I get that for sure. I know, for example, about 85% of women who are dealing with a substance use disorder had some kind of sexual trauma in their background, some kind of assault, something happened. I know a lot of men who've dealt with a lot of violence, and that's led to a lot of behaviors, a lot of things to cope. And in family members, by definition, you meet trauma. You meet the definition of post-traumatic stress disorder. The definition of post-traumatic stress disorder, one of the criteria is fear for your own life or fear for the life of a loved one. And I would make an argument you're probably fearing for the life of your loved one over and over and over again. So here's what happens in any event, in any situation. This is how we get through it, all right? So something bad happens. It could be an addiction-related issue, or it could be a car accident, or it could be a violent situation. Your brain takes that information in, and it was incredibly scary, all right? But you process it. You talk to people about it. Maybe you even have a dream about it that night. You move it along, and it gets settled. You're not happy about it, but it's in an okay place. Have you ever heard the terminology, I'm okay with it, or I'm in a good place with this? That's where this stuff comes out of. It isn't, you're not okay that it happened, but you're in an okay place with the situation. Now, understand when some bad things happen, especially if they're really, really bad, the brain will not allow you to process it. It will get stuck. And the reason is, how many people have heard about defense mechanisms? The Freudian stuff, like there wasn't much that Sigmund Freud did for the world. I mean, the guy was kind of freaky if you want to get real about it. If he was here today, he'd be on the other side of the glass receiving treatment, doing cocaine and writing about sex all night. That sounds like a rock and roll star, not a therapist. That's a joke, guys, and it's a great joke. That was a fantastic joke. So at any rate, you know, the defense mechanisms exist to make it's a way for your mind to not allow you to feel too much emotion at any given time. It basically is, think of it as a curtain that is put between you and the event, because the event might be too much to handle. And you might have a breakdown. So it's not just denial. The defense mechanism that most people have heard about is denial. There's also rationalization, intellectualizing. There's all kinds of different defense mechanisms. So in some cases, something bad happens. There's no one to talk to, or worse yet, you talk to somebody and they shame you about what happened, and it gets stuck. It literally gets stuck in the pathway. So think of it as a pathway that the event happens and it works its way to a good space. Sometimes it gets stuck. So let's talk through the difference here. And I've used this example before. So the difference would be in this scenario. Somebody comes in the lobby, right? And there's a loud bang and there's a lot of noise and there's two guys out there fighting. And I go out and one of them has a knife and I literally feel like I'm in danger, but I'm able to, I don't know, ninja him up and disarm him. Not that I would be able to do that, but let's just pretend. And the police come and everything's okay. And I was really, really scared. But I come in here and I talk to you all about it. And while I'm talking, you guys don't make fun of me. You don't say anything shaming. You don't say, well, why did you let him in the building in the first place? You just basically listen. You say, well, I'm so glad you're okay. And then I call my wife and I tell my wife. And then I call my brother and I tell my brother. Maybe I tell somebody else at work. And the whole time I'm moving it along. Do you follow me? Now let's say that the same situation comes down. Very same circumstance. But when I come in, I don't really want to say anything because I don't know you. And I'm afraid like that's not how a man is. I'm just going to suck this up and get through it, right? And then maybe I call my brother and I talk to him and he makes fun of me about it. Like, what are you talking about? That's not a big deal. I quickly learn to what? Shut up about it. And when I shut up about it, it gets stuck. So now it's there. It hasn't been processed. Now I'm going to make the assumption. I'm going to throw the point out there that where addiction is concerned, most of the time people are not talking about it early on. Maybe after you start coming to family group, you're talking about it, but the very first time your husband has an incident and it's really embarrassing, you don't talk to anybody about it. The first time your kid gets kicked out of school for having drugs, you don't talk to anybody about it. The first time they wind up in the emergency room, you try to cover it up. You get to, but every time you're covering it up, it's getting stuck. Every time you've refused, even if somebody asks you, how's Joey doing, and you refuse to tell them because of this, it's getting stuck. You guys understand that? And that's why your behaviors as you move through this and you do things against your own will, and you act out and you save and you rescue and you give money when you shouldn't have given money and stuff, that's because you're being driven by trauma. And I'm going to show you how this works, okay? It's not codependency. It's not enabling. It's a trauma response to a life-threatening situation. All right. So well, first of all, do you guys get those principles? And yes.
Not so much to the family, but the person struggling. Maybe this is dumb, but it's just dawning on me with my own son. So if he's had a lot of trauma.
It's the same for everybody. It's whether it's a family, it's just that your trauma is
Does it add to
different.
His use?
Oh, for sure. Like I said, there are some people who will just straight up tell you that like addiction exists, whatever the addiction is, whether it's drugs and alcohol, internet pornography, gambling, whatever it is, shopping, it exists to deal with trauma. And I'm going to show you how this works. So you guys, I'm just talking to you about a very specific one to family members, but it's absolutely those of us in addiction. Carolyn?
But then isn't there a point where it becomes that trauma has become their excuse to use?
Okay, so did you guys hear the question? It's a fantastic question. Can trauma become an excuse to use? Anything can become an excuse to use. Anything can become an excuse to use. It doesn't detract from the idea or the point that it's there. The myth is that there's somebody out there walking around who's not damaged goods. Do you see this? Like what the problem we have in our society is the script has been flipped to make y'all think that like there are people out there that are normal, and if it was just normal, everything would be okay. But what I'm here to tell you is one of the perks of being a mental health therapist is you know that everybody's effed up. I mean, it's true. From every socioeconomic class, people who you would envy and you would look at and you would say, wow, if only my kid was doing that. If only our relationship, or if only I was making that much money. I'm telling you, I have the same person in my office talking them down off the bridge. And that's the deal. The deal is that you guys have been sold a bill of goods as Americans that there's some place to arrive where you're not dealing with trauma. Life is traumatic. Do you guys understand that? Like life is very, very difficult. It's hard. For the majority of human existence, it has been survival. Our brain has not even evolved to the point where we can conceive that we're all relatively safe tonight. So we're going to spend the day looking for psychological threats or manufacturing threats if we can't find them. Do you guys get that? So absolutely, addiction has something to do with it. So here's a couple other things to remember. Memories and triggers around trauma are not just images. Like when you watch a movie on TV and somebody's having a memory, they usually show images. And it's very, very false to understand that it's a sensory experience only on the visual level. It's a sensory experience on every level. Every sense that you were going through when that happened is going to be present in the memory. What's even more interesting is your feelings and your emotions and your thoughts that were present are going to be triggers and part of the memory. That's why, like here at FAVORE Greenville, I make fun of this all the time, but they'll do scented candle therapy or whatever the hell it's called. It'll be like, come on in and huff a cinnamon toast crunch candle. And what's going down there is there's comfort in certain smells. It smells like grandma's house, or it smells like a safe place. There's also terror in certain smells. Music. How about music? How many people I can throw a song on and it'll take you right back to wherever you were when you first heard that song? So we have to remember that this is much more, this is way beyond just what you saw the night that your son overdosed or that kind of stuff. It's way beyond that. So you have a trauma, you got a stuck memory. We all agree that can happen, right? And it's stuck there, and it can be multiple memories, overdoses. It could be picking somebody up at jail. It could be getting a phone call when they first got kicked out of school. It could be whatever it is, but it engendered that fear response. Yes?
I have a question. You may have already answered it, and I probably already heard the answer from different sources. But like, for example, talking about trauma, my husband and he has many siblings, but one of his sisters and him, he is a recovering addict. His sister has never gone through recovery, has gone through the same trauma, childhood trauma that he went through. Yet, she can, or I have been around her to see that she can drink a glass of wine. She doesn't necessarily go off the deep end. My husband can drink a glass of wine, same amount of trauma in childhood. He goes completely off the deep end, and it's hard for him to get back. So how does trauma
Yeah, well,
affect-
first of all, part of it would be it's possible that she processed it. So you don't know what, and remember, that doesn't mean you saw a therapist. Are we clear on this? Most of the time, you didn't see a therapist to process it. You could have processed it with your best friend in high school. You could have processed it with your Sunday school teacher. You could have processed it with grandma. Do you get where I'm coming from? That doesn't mean she ever went to therapy. So she could have moved it along, whereas he didn't. And sometimes women are more prone to move it along than men, right? Men are told, just suck it up, do what you got to do. It could be that. It could also just be people are different, man. Literally, we all process things, and what's traumatic to her might not be traumatic to me, so on and so forth. And her brain didn't change in the way that his did. So the deal would be you have this stuck, and you have data coming in through the course of the day. So you have this stuck memory in your mind. The first time your son had to go to rehab, the first time you had to go pick your husband up from jail with a DUI, whatever it is, all these things are stuck, and all this stuff is coming in through the course of the day. Sounds, songs, different things, different attitude from the person. The way the person is even responding to you is influencing you. It's all this input, and it's going into that stuck memory. And what it will do is it will trigger tension. It will trigger all those feelings that you had when it first happened, and you might not even know or understand why this is going on. There are sometimes with obvious things you do know, right? There's obvious situations. If your loved one uses again after being in recovery for a period of time, that's going to trigger you for sure, right? But I'm telling you, there's all kinds of other stuff through the course of the day. All kinds of other things. And then you will be seeking relief. And I'm going to talk you through how this works. You get that part? All right, so let's go through my experience, because again, somebody asked the question, could it be trauma for the person themselves? So I grew up in a home, I've shared this openly before, domestic violence, any given day, you're basically like looking around the corner anywhere you're going. There's no such thing as a good day in my household growing up. And it's repetitive and repetitive and repetitive and repetitive, okay? I don't know anything about it, not saying anything to anybody. Now, the input through the lens, through my lens, it's interesting. If the house is too quiet, it was dangerous. Something was going to pop off. If people were upset, if people looked like they were in a bad mood, bad juju, man. Okay? Now, when I go home and I talk to my family, if one of my family members are upset and I'm like, what's wrong? And I jump on it, they would say I was being codependent. Do you get that? I'm not codependent. I'm like, danger. It's going to pop off any minute. I have all the thoughts. What's wrong with them? What's going to happen? I have the physical tension. Get ready to fight. This is what's going on inside of me. Before I'm in recovery, I'm doing life like that. That creates the tension. I create the escape, and I go get high. That becomes a self-reinforcing loop. Do you see that? And then all the other stuff happens in the brain, too. Can we buy that one?
Yeah.
All right. So here's wait. Okay, yeah. So let's do this. So this is an option on how I could deal with this. All right. So this goes back to somebody said something about excuses. So this is me after I get into recovery and after I get into therapy and after I become a self-care ninja, right? A freaking yoga doing self-care ninja. A yoga doing oatmeal eating self-care machine. I have no idea what oatmeal has to do with anything. All right. So I have the memory. I have the data. All right. here goes the tension. My old pattern is to go get high. But I have to develop a new, it's called a coping skill. How many have heard a coping skill? So I have to develop a coping skill. Now there's all kinds of different coping skills that people can develop. Now the thing that I believe in is this little formula called observe, orient, think of your options, and then act. So the very first thing I have to do is observe what's going on with me. I want to get high. This doesn't make any sense. Everything's been going okay. And I want to be looking around and I want to try to disempower these subconscious thoughts and realize that boredom's not good for you, Rich, and that's probably why you're getting wiggy. Okay? And then, orient myself to the here and now. This is so important. You may have heard this in other therapeutic settings. Have you ever heard of grounding? You got to orient yourself to the here and now and be like, this is not happening. I'm not 8 years old. I'm here. You literally center yourself. And then you ask yourself, what are my options? Can I leave this party that's triggering me? Can I leave? Can I go out and do something because it's too quiet? Can I go out? Maybe I can go lift weights and try to get, and then you pick something and you do it. And that's called a coping skill. You get that part?
Is this also what they call when they get restless?
People call it that. They wouldn't say that it's because of that. The program that talks a lot about restless, irritable, and discontent would say that that's a spiritual issue. I would make an argument that is this. But whatever, it's restless, it's agitated, and it's different for different people. Some people might get sad, but the tension is something uncomfortable that you used to relieve with something not that good for yourself, okay? And then the other thing that I can do is I can do preventative things. And that's stuff I do before I'm triggered. Anybody have any examples of what that would be? What would I do before I'm triggered? Go to meetings. Yes?
Just have a decent schedule.
Have a schedule, go to meetings, take care of myself, try to watch who I'm hanging out with. It's all the stuff that I can do, ahead of time to set myself up for success. All right? So if we go and we talk about, yes?
Talking about triggers, what if you can recognize in your husband that trigger is happening?
For him.
Yes, you can see those behaviors that you've seen before.
It's a good question.
And you know, what can you do?
Because some of the problem is many people can't observe their own triggers. They can't observe. It's subconscious. It's operating beneath their. So how do you get to the observe part if the person won't? And it's tricky for family members to do that. I've heard of situations where it's gone well, though, where people have said, like, I'm going to help point this out. And then I've also heard where it's been pushed too far and the person gets angry and it's the opposite of what you want to have happen. Our opinion is that family members should be part of this solution and they should be able to even know this and have that type of conversation. What we also know is you got to be careful, because if you push it too far and you keep asking over and over again, hey, it seems like something's bothering you, have you called your sponsor, have you called your therapist, that could engender a whole really negative response. So you have to play the line. But in general, we think it's okay for family members to try to point that out. But again, figure out what the sweet spot is on how much you can point it out and at what point does it cross the line into the person getting aggravated with you. Do you get that part of it? There's no right or wrong answer to that. Ultimately, the person themselves is going to have to take this and go with it. I can tell you what we do as coaches and what we do as sponsors and what we do as therapists is we point it out to people constantly. So one of the things about going to a meeting, one of the reasons why you want your loved one to attend meetings, regardless of what type of meeting it is that they're going to hear other people going through this and it's going to orient them to what they're dealing with. It's very hard for this to fall on the family. Very difficult for this to all fall on you. I can have a conversation with your loved one. I can literally say the same thing that you said to them, and he will not get angry at me. And if you say it, it will be your nagging. Mm-hmm. And that's why meetings are so important, because that's what we're doing the whole entire time on the preventative end, or an individual therapist or anybody else that they could talk to. So on the family end, the same thing happens. what's stuck here is maybe your son or daughter had some type of incident. Maybe it was an overdose. Maybe it's your husband. Maybe it was a DUI or whatever. But things happened, and there's a pattern to it, and boom, it's stuck there. You never talked about it when it was first going on. So basically, you start getting data through the course of the day, too. You start arguing about something. The kid wants to go somewhere. He's asking you wants to go to the concert, and you're like, no, I don't want to do that. Or maybe it's a hut, whatever it is. It starts to build in you. Same exact thing. The tension starts to build. You know, and maybe let's pretend that the tension is related to he wants money to go to a concert or whatever. It's just building, building, building. There's anger. You're telling yourself all these stories around last time he got angry, he went out and got high and wound up in the hospital. And so what do? You rescue or you give in. You bail them out of the tension-filled situation, and you experience relief. And when you talk to people and they're honest with you, it would be hard to discern. If I hooked you up to a machine, it would be hard for you to discern between me getting high and you getting relief in a situation like that. It's a drug. It's a drug for a parent. It's a drug for a spouse. No question about it. It's such, and it becomes a feedback loop for y'all too. You get that? And that's what has been labeled codependency. Now, we could do the same thing. You guys can do the same thing, except the data would be different, right? But you could do the same thing. It would be, you still want to orient yourself, and you still want to find a better way to cope. What else could you do other than rescue? That's what you start to ask yourself. I said, no, I'm not going to pay for this. I said, no, I'm not going to do this. Maybe I call somebody when I'm in a situation like this. Maybe I go out and distract myself. You have to go back to one thing. Remember, what you want to have happen in these situations is you want the person to, you want to be able to get the person into the right situation where he hears from the right person, and then he's okay. And I want to tell you that doesn't exist, guys. That does not exist. That's only in the movies and A&E reality TV. What happens for people in recovery is it's a process and it's an experience, and it's one step forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward, 1 step back. You in the back of your mind think you can drink, and so you go drink, right? And in the back of your mind, you can do this, and it's all this experience that goes along, and you learning how to deal and act within your own, within your own vision of yourself, how you want to be. Yes?
So what you're saying is that when we rescue, that is our drug.
Yes.
If we're the family member.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
So we're getting our heroin by the rescue.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it heroin, because there's probably people in here that don't like
Well,
that.
that just
But yeah, but absolutely, that's what I would say. I would say that the relief that comes, if you've ever been scared for your loved one, let's just even take addiction out of the picture. If you've ever been up here convinced that something's up, okay, picture this. You're at an amusement park and you can't find your 4-year-old. And you don't know where he is. And you're just running around, and then you find him. Tell me that's not a drug. Whatever that is that is released in your brain is a drug, a powerful drug. The way it makes you feel from where you were. And if it's addiction, guys, it isn't happening only once in a while. It's happening to y'all all the time. And this is what has been labeled codependency. I don't think it's codependency. I think it's a trauma response. You're actually doing the right thing. I mean, let's get real about this. You going and trying to save your kid who's in trouble, or your loved one who's in trouble, is the right thing to do. It's what we do. We save each other. Right? But whenever you start getting a hit off of it, and it's happening over and over again, and it's not actually saving, it's perpetuating a pattern of behavior on their part that is ultimately worse. Do you get that? And it's also going to kill you. Remember, we've talked about the most likely outcome from this whole thing is not that your loved one dies of an overdose or dies of a drug-related issue. Hands down, statistically speaking, the most likely outcome is this thing lingers forever and takes you out early from a stress-related condition. Carolyn?
I would somewhat argue, though, and maybe not argue is the strong word, but where we were, say, a year ago, if I called the helpline and they told me, okay, try this, I felt better than if I did what I wanted to do, because I had a second opinion, if you will.
So you can do things, that would fall into this category if we go back here. That would fall into some of this stuff. You can definitely do things, make a phone call and ask a question that's going to make it easier for you to deal with it. Without question, you can do that. You have to be careful where you do that. You want to know where some people try to get this taken care of? Anyone want to take a guess on one of the places where a lot of people will try to get this taken care of, which is actually like really detrimental to their health, is on Google. So they will go on to look for the answer to the question, Carolyn, so that they can get a little bit of relief for the situation. And the next thing you know, they'll be 15 pages deep in rehab ads.
Yeah.
So that's not where you want to go with it. You want to make a phone call to somebody that you know and trust, who has no agenda, who can hear you out and say, well, that makes sense. I've had a lot of those phone calls, guys. I bet you that the value add in terms of what FAVORE Greenville does, that particular value add in terms of hearing somebody out and saying, that makes sense.
Yeah,
That
true.
simple little thing with no strings attached on the back end can be very, very helpful. And then the other stuff is, the preventative stuff on your end is being here tonight and trying to take care of yourself, and some of the stuff that I talk about tonight with positive psychology. So I'm gonna take you through this, okay, with my story, all right? Now, other things that you need to know about this scenario. Your backstory can also contribute to the things that'll get stuck. If you had somebody in your family who had an addiction issue, for example, it's going to be harder for you to kind of deal with this, because all your experiences with your dad growing up will also contribute to this. Do you get where I'm coming from? So the backstory is also important on what gets stuck. So let's look at my situation. And I've told you my story before. This is a picture of me and my wife, Melissa. So I love Melissa, and I'm not just saying that because my daughter's here so she can go home and tell her. Make sure you tell your mom I said this. And I always loved Melissa, like with all my heart, but my brain became, without question, where is it? Here. My brain crosses the line at some point. When did it cross the line? Probably before the opioid pills took hold. But certainly when the opioid pills took hold. It was probably before that, but when I got those things on board, man, it was like game over. Everybody starts to get pushed to the side. Even though I love my kids, even though I love my wife, I'm not making decisions based on anything rational at that point. Even though I'm a relatively rational person, I'm not making decisions. And we're doing the same things y'all are doing. Crisis to crisis, fight to fight. Why can't you get your act together? Don't you understand what you're doing with yourself? Fighting, all those things are going on all the time, and nothing is ever changing. It's a continuous cycle of her getting angry at me promising it'll never happen again, and then it happening again. So the issue was, in her backstory, okay, she grew up poor, all right? And that kept her hostage to me because I was the breadwinner. Do you follow this? The thing that was stuck was that experience when she was young, and every time I was going to have to leave, who was going to pay the bills? What were we going to have to do? How were we going to move through this? And guys,
how many kids?
At that time we had 3. Okay? So and understand that me literally doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again in a pattern, a vicious cycle. She could never make the move on, you got to leave and you got to stay out. You guys get that? Because with that meant poverty. So this is real important. If you can identify what it is, the story you're telling yourself about your loved one that's keeping you from taking the action that you should be taking, you can then confront it and find a way to work through it. You know, basically that's what she did. She found a way to figure out we'll live if we got to deal with that. And then, when I've told you this before, when she said you're out and you can't come back, and if you ever do that again, you're out, I believed it. There was something different. Her brain had shifted. Her brain shifted. And that's what we need to have happen. You got to have your brain shift. You got to, whatever that is that's stuck, that's holding you back, that fear. Now the problem with this is The fear can also be very, very basic stuff, like I'm afraid they're going to die. And that's a really hard thing to get in touch with. But you can work on it and you can start to think about it if you feel like you're being held hostage by a situation. And some of you might feel that way. If you're afraid to make the move on a circumstance, you can start to, what would that be like? How would I deal with that? Or how likely is that? Because that's an interesting thing to start digging into. We also got to remember in today's world, the default is always the worst case scenario. But the truth is, I've said this, I mean, it's not a popular thing for me to say, but even with all the increases in overdoses, the most likely thing statistically is not an overdose, guys. The most likely thing statistically is it just lingers and lingers and takes on different forms and lingers and lingers. And if you don't learn how to set boundaries, you wind up in a hospital. Family members of people addicted are 5 times more likely to be inpatient hospitalized than the general population. So if she finally does what she needs to do, I'm out, I come back with my tail between my legs, and we live happily ever after, right? So that's Nathan, Chrissy, and Holden. That's my grandson. There's Megan and Isaac. There's Elizabeth. This is Elizabeth right here. My daughter Elizabeth. Let's give her a hand. She's helping us out with our social media, trying to do that a little bit better. We went on to have 4 more children, so I have 7 kids, guys. Oh, that's what everyone says, yes. So the point of this being identifying, and it may not be that simple either. It may not be one thing. But I'm going to tell you, it typically is. Or if it isn't one thing, it's a theme. It's a theme. And it could be even stuff like the stigma of addiction will keep people from moving. Literally, what are they going to say about us if I kick him out? What are they going to say about us if I call the police the next time my son punches holes in the drywall? What is the neighbors going to say? Stigma will keep a person stone cold locked into a situation where we would prefer to have this in the house and not have anybody know what's going on. So here's what I want to tell you about that. So again, understand that anybody who's judging you in any circumstance or any situation is probably acting out their own demons around addiction. Anybody who's judging you in any given circumstance from a psychological point of view, they're probably acting out their own demons around addiction, meaning they grew up in a house where their father was an alcoholic and nobody ever said anything. It's too hard for them to be compassionate because it'll break their own heart. If it's beyond that, if it's just a self-righteous person, because there are people who are able to be like that, that's the type of person that you don't want to associate with anyway. I know it sounds very cliche to say, but like that's the type of person that the level of toxicity, you don't need that in your life in any kind of way.
Say it again.
You don't need that in any...
That's kind of what we say to our children when they're younger too. You know, you think about it when people are making bad choices when they're young, or, you know, they're not really your friend. If
they talk to you that way, they're not really your friend.
To you, or...
Yep, but we don't embody that as adults. We get all up in our head about what people are going to say and what they're going to think and things like that. And we have a lot of stuff that today helps manufacture images. We have Facebook, we have all that stuff. We can all look around and say what we're not doing really well, that kind of thing. But if it's keeping you from acting in your own best interest, it needs to be confronted. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm in recovery. Actually, I don't even necessarily get down with calling myself a person in long-term recovery. I'm just a dude who doesn't do drugs or alcohol, right? It's a healthcare condition, guys, that's in remission now. Just like a person who had cancer and got treatment, it's not, and that goes in remission. My disorder, my disease is in remission. All right? Now, do I need to have everybody know that? No, I don't. But do I have shame if somebody knows that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm a survivor, so to speak. This is how you want to start thinking about this. Because I think that the stigma, other than like unresolved trauma, right, around particular stuff, the stigma will keep people locked into situations longer than pretty much anything else I can think of. All right. So, comments, thoughts, questions about the trauma model and how to break through your particular box. Any questions about that or anything that I can clear up? Yes.
I know you're saying, you know, people that you don't need to have in your life that are not going to support you or help you, but when it's a family member and, you know, they don't wanna look at it as an illness or disease or whatever, it's just an addiction.
Yeah.
And that's all it is, and they say, well, cigarettes are addicting too. I wanna bang my head against the wall.
Yeah.
How?
It depends on how close they are, to be perfectly honest.
A sister.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you that, like, I would confront the hell out of my brother if he did that.
I don't know how to do it well, and that's the
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. You should, you know, that is, how do you do that well? How do you say the things you need to say in a way that they're gonna hear it, and that they're not gonna totally just write you off, right? And so, it would be education on what goes down with the brain. It would be getting them around people where they could be confronted with, like, what the stigma is, right? And get in touch with exactly who does become addicted. And it's not a matter of willpower. And then the other thing I would say to your sister is, and this is where I would love to say this, has she ever tried to do something and not been able to stick to it? And has she ever known the right thing to do and done the wrong thing anyway? And if she said no, I would psychoanalyze her there in the moment, and I would diagnose her with narcissistic personality disorder, and we would hospitalize her at Marshall Pickens. That would get it done. So you know, I mean, if people literally think that way, this is where I go with it, to be honest with you. If you have somebody like that is so held into their own pain, because that's what's driving a person that's saying that stuff, that they will not even approach it, you really have to think, can I deal with this person in my life while this health crisis is going on?
Or in our case, it was that they didn't want to deal with their own addiction.
That's very common. If I take a look at this and I acknowledge it, what does that say about me? So there's nothing wrong with being able to identify the area of your life that's eating your lunch and you need to get it done differently. And that is just, those are just the facts of life. Now here's where I go with it. It's interesting. So what do you do about family? I say it's all about timing, because immediate family, siblings, parents, that type of stuff, it's harder to just cut them off. So what I say is if you're in the middle of the health crisis, that's a time when you're probably not going to be taking the calls as much. And if things simmer down and you feel like you're in a better space, then you jump back on the phone. That's kind of the advice. You hear people talk about all kinds of different ways to handle it. One of the most popular ones is get a dog, so that anytime they start talking about something you don't really want to talk about, you say, well, I gotta go, the dog needs to go out, right? It's like you just find a way to deal with that. You have to ask yourself, how much can you take? How much can you take? And I'm telling you, like, this is a stressful situation. Guys, I'm gonna tell you, like, this is the most stressful health condition that anyone will ever have to deal with. Number one, we don't have great answers as a society right now. It's pretty much a one-trick pony, agreed? You kind of go to rehab or you go to IOP or whatever. There's really not a lot of great answers for it. The second thing is that it's never like really tied off, right? You're never complete. We've talked about this in here before. When my son was in the hospital with that terrible situation, he was in a bed, he was there. You know, it was still bad, but it was complete for the moment. It's never complete. You have no room on your plate for toxic people right now.
But with the holidays.
Well, and how do we know who toxic people are? Anybody who starts the sentence with, if that was my kid, I would, or if that was my husband, I would, or they want to give you a speech about how it's just such and cigarettes are addictive and things like that. It's you know, one of the best ways to deal with a family member is to try to get them to go on my Facebook page and troll me. Get them on there and get them to say something, because I can engage them in that. And I can get to the root of that. There's no basis for the idea that it's just a matter of quitting. There's literally no scientific basis for that. There's not even a scientific basis for any of y'all like changing your diet, where it's just like, just change your diet. You understand it? Like, the psychology behind it and the physiology behind behavior change is so complex. And then you mix in substances. Now it's an uphill battle. So let's go through some of the stuff real quick around positive psychology. Some of the things that you want to have a takeaway. This is so your head doesn't explode while you're dealing with this. Under the idea and the concept that if your head is intact, it'll be easier and better for everyone. That was a joke too. Tough crowd tonight. All right. So, we talked about toxic relationships. Do we need to say anything else about that part of it? Can it be removed? I mean, can it be improved? Can it be eliminated? What are the conversations you need to have that you're not having? Those type of things.
Can you say something like, or is it okay to just say, like I say sometimes, like, I'm just gonna have to agree to disagree with you because we're not getting anywhere with this. Even with this stuff that I keep coming back with you about, like.
Yeah, so let's use an analogy. Let's pretend it was diabetes. And every time your loved one went over to this person's house, all they did was give them sweets and just fill them up with things they shouldn't be eating because they didn't believe diabetes was real. And it's just, he can eat whatever he wants. Would you keep sending them over to the house? No. This is the same thing. You have to start asking yourself, how many times do I want to go over to the house and be fed garbage? How many times do I want to get on the phone and be fed garbage? I'm strongly encouraging everybody in here to reevaluate those relationships. You just don't have room right now for that. You can come back to it when things start to work out. You can jump back into those relationships when things start to work out. And then remember, you never know what's going on with them. This is a fantastic picture. This is a social media picture, but this is exactly how people roll. Here's what's on social media. So it's like, oh my God, she is such a good mom. In the meantime, it's a trap house, right? Everything is like totally out of control. And this is exactly how the world is too. I want you to think about this. Even people in your own family, you still only know about this much of them. You still only are scratching the surface on knowledge about what's going on behind closed doors. So as you evaluate yourself and your known circumstance up against an imaginary perfect, be very, very careful. Be very careful. Understand that everybody's carrying a different burden. Everybody's dragging around a different cross. I'm not suggesting everybody's dealing with addiction. This just is a very particular struggle in that area. A couple other things real quick. If you're dealing with this from a parenting standpoint, so if you're here tonight and you're here and mom's not here, dad's not here, you got to get them in and you got to get them on the same page with you. You got to start understanding this as a unit. All right? And this is just all the stuff that goes into parenting around addiction. I want to tell you that this is an original concept that I invented because I think it's pretty damn good. And I have an issue with humility. I like to talk about this stuff. All right. So at any rate, no, this is it. Think about it for a minute. Everybody, when they're dealing with their kids, they want to talk about technique, rules. What's the contract going to be? How are they going to be in at midnight or are they going to be in at 10 a.m. or 10 p.m.? Do you see that? Like
10 a.m.
That's all the things we all want to talk about that. But you cannot talk about that if you don't start here. Yeah. Do I believe that my wife is a good parent and wants the best for my children? Yeah. That's where and so if you cannot unequivocally answer that question, yes, you've got to go to marriage therapy and marriage counseling before you can tackle this issue. Because it'll just all fall apart. If you literally think that your spouse doesn't care about your kid and doesn't want the best for him, that's an important part of the sentence. They may not know how to do it. Do you guys understand the difference? There's a difference between not knowing how to do it and not caring. This is a skills issue. This is I was never taught it, or maybe I've had some issues in my own life. This over here is a problem. And if you think that, you can't move forward. The second area, you have to respect one another in these conversations, and it's going to be very difficult to respect each other in these conversations. Why is it going to be difficult? There's nothing that engenders different opinions more than these scenarios. There's no black and white issue. The only thing you'll get if you call a professional is what? Well, send them to our rehab. And even a favor, what are we going to say? Let's get, there's no definitive answer. So you're always going to have a point of disagreement about this. And understand this. What I'm about to tell you is a fact. In any situation, in any given circumstance, every system, every organism, every system seeks a thing called homeostasis or balance. And so if there's one parent who wants to be a hard ass, there is always going to be another parent who wants to let it slide. It's to balance it out. It's supposed to be that way so that you can come together and you can talk about what to do with a compromise. But you cannot do that if you're not talking to each other in a respectful way. If you're just disagreeing and you're yelling at each other and it turns into a fight, I've seen this issue just destroy marriages. Just destroy marriages. Does that make sense? You have to give each other time off. Be careful to make sure that not one parent is taking care of everything. Make sure that you have time off. And this is where you can also ask for help. Are there other people? You've got to be a person who's not toxic. It's got to be a person who can help you. And then you can get to the techniques and stuff. Because now you can talk about, and we can argue all day whether it should be 11 p.m. or midnight. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because we're going to argue about this in a civilized way. And I think that you're a good mom and you want the best for your kid. Do you follow me? So that's got to be discussed. Any questions about that? This is very specific to parenting. I feel like that's something we have to come back to every once in a while. Any questions with that? All right. So let's go over some of this stuff with happiness and well-being. This is now the stress management part of the course. We've talked about this before when it comes to happiness and well-being. 50% of your mood or 50% of your happiness is you're born with it. It is personality. Anybody know anybody who's just in a good mood no matter what? Right? It's kind of like laughing and happy. Anybody know anybody who's just grumpy no matter what? So there is a tendency to lean a certain direction. And also your circumstances, over any given period of time, overall, your circumstances will impact about 10% of your mood. Now, for the record, when you're going through the worst part of the circumstances, it'll go below 10%. But overall, in the long term, it's only going to impact about 10%. 40% of your mood on any given day is 100% up to you. This is where positive psychology comes in. It's called voluntary control. So the first exercise, this acronym PERMA. They go around the world, they go around all the different countries, all the different places, and they get people to rate life satisfaction. And for people who scored high in life satisfaction, these were the 5 areas that they had going on in their life. Now, it's not like 20%, 20%, 20%. It's just you want to look at this and ask, is there any area that's just glaringly problematic in your life? So the first one is pleasure. When was the last time you did something fun in the midst of this crisis? And it doesn't mean I had a good time at work, it was a cool work activity with a good project going. It's literally when did you go do something fun? You went to a funny movie, you went out there, you did something, you were laughing, you were silly, it was totally not task oriented. When did you guys do something fun? You don't have to answer that, but you need to be thinking about it. Probably been a while. And there are people out there right now that are thinking, this guy is an idiot. This dude's an idiot. Why would I go have fun in the middle of this crisis? You can't solve the crisis overnight, guys. And it's still going to be there whether you go have fun or you don't have fun. All work and no play doesn't work. So, fun. The second thing is engagement. Engagement is different than fun. Engagement is what do you have in your life that whenever you're doing it, you're 100% absorbed in it. It could be a hobby. It could be work if you're lucky. It could be art. It could be, some people blog. That's their thing. What is it that whenever you're doing it, you're 100% absorbed? What's interesting, whenever you study that, there's a psychological payoff in the moment whenever you're doing it, and it lingers afterward. So a lot of times people struggle with this one because they don't really like, their job's okay, it's a good paying job, they don't want to leave their job, right? And they really can't think, I don't have any hobbies, I can't remember the last time I had a hobby or whatever. And it's kind of like, how do I even know what works there? What you got to do is you got to go back in your mind to what did you like to do when you were a kid before they told you that you weren't allowed to do that, and that you can never make a career out of that, so no longer do that, right? And go back and do a little bit of that. Go back, and if it was art, get back into art. If it was, extreme sports and you were into free climbing, I always say free climbing, all you're thinking about when you're free climbing is where am I putting my next handhold? You're not thinking about the mortgage. You're not thinking about your kid. You spend a little bit of time in engagement. Any questions about engagement? Relationships. We talked about this already. Quality over quantity. Who do you need to get more of and who do you need to get less of? And it's not about numbers. It's just about, there are 2 different types of people in the world. Somebody walks in the room and everybody's happy, and somebody walks out of the room and everybody's happy. You want to be more with people in the first group. Spend time, they'll lift you up. Meaning is very important. And it's not just meaning in terms of your spirituality and what do you believe happens when people die and what do you believe. It's meaning of things like suffering. How do I make sense of the fact, again, let's go beyond addiction. Let's just look at the world. How do I make sense of the fact that bad things happen to good people? And do I run from that? Am I afraid of that? Do I not even want to consider stuff like that? Or do I want to start to think like, how do I reconcile this and keep a perspective on life whenever life can go so sideways at any given time? For any of us related to anything. Are we clear on that? You could get your addiction, you could get your loved one's addiction issue fixed tonight. And something could happen tomorrow that was worse, unrelated to addiction. Are we clear on this? There is no destination that when you get there, life is good. It's a series of what? Problem solving. It's a series of dealing with different levels of different things and helping each other through stuff. And how do you make sense of that? Does anybody have anything that they would share regarding meaning? Yes.
Well, probably 2 weeks ago, I thought dealing with her addiction was the thing. Then I went to Florida and had a mini vacation, so I felt really good. And then Sunday, my husband went in hospital.
Yeah, see that?
So
Yep. And sometimes you can't tell
I
it
didn't
all.
care about her anymore.
Yeah. You start to get to this idea of how do I do life? How do I do the bad parts of life? And when you look at this is really driven a lot by a thing called logotherapy, or Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he talks about the meaning of suffering, the meaning of love, and the meaning of work. Like this idea of, are you contributing something to the world, and how do you feel about that? Love and relationships, and how are you going to do relationships? Are you going to run from them? Because when people get hurt when they're in relationships. Are you going to embrace them and deal with them? Are you going to lean into that stuff, or how are you going to go through this? And there is no good way to do it. Like you think about something like death in the family, right? And you get into that and you start thinking about like, what would I do if I lost somebody? And one of the interesting things I heard a person say this. He was giving a speech and he said, if I lose, he was talking about his dad. He was very close to his dad. And he was, if I lose, and his father had cancer, so it was kind of imminent. When I lose my dad, I am going to be the person at the funeral that everyone can lean on. I'm going to be the person that's there and holds it together because I know all my siblings are going to go berserk. And that was his way of putting meaning to a situation that was unacceptable to him. Do you follow him? And you'll see that from other people too. Have you ever seen anybody who's created a memorial out of loss, right? Yeah. So you have like a situation where you lose somebody early and you create a memorial. That's the same type of thing. Nonprofits are created out of that type of situation. So you start thinking about that. You start thinking how you move forward in that. And then the A stands for attitude, meaning we can choose our response to any given situation. Now here's how it works. You're not looking for equal distribution around all 5 of those things. You go and you look at your life and you say, is there any area that's just glaringly lacking? Is there any area where I'd want to talk to somebody a little bit more? Or when was the last time I've had fun? Or back in the day, I used to like to, hey, you know what? I told you all before, if you need anything to do Legos. Go ahead, like give it a shot. Do some Legos. Get like an adult Lego set, or don't even get an adult Lego set. Go get like a kid's Lego set. And get that book out and try to put it together the way it says in that book. You will find yourself just down in the Legos, man. And you get the idea. It's allowing you to check out of life for a moment.
Buy a puzzle.
Buy a puzzle. Do woodworking. Have you guys known, it isn't as much now, but there was a period of time when the adult coloring books were a craze. That was very therapeutic. Here for a while, we had a needlepoint recovery group. They made me a needlepoint. They made me a gift. You guys want to know what it said? Please don't do coke in the bathroom. That's what it said. I'm not kidding. I probably have it in my office still. I thought, that's fantastic. It's a very useful gift. Because at a recovery center, you probably need that, right? So you start to look and you start to say, what can I do different? Or you look back on your life and you say, I remember when I was, golfing. I used to golf a little bit more. I will talk to family members whose interests and pursuits have gone completely away. And I hope you guys can tap into the idea of how that will feed into your own depression. That's not how you're designed or wired. You're supposed to look for your own thing every once in a while. You're not going to become selfish with it. It's not going to be one of these things where all of a sudden it pushes everything else away. But if you try to get ahead of it. Now the attitude thing is literally just choose your response. And you guys have already, another way to think of it is this. This is a little bit simpler. The pleasant life. Look at that kid. Now that kid is hammering that donut without any concern for the number of calories that are in it. Without any concern for whether or not he's going to suffer the consequences and gain too much weight. Do you see what I'm saying? That is pure bliss right there. And another way to think of it is you need a little bit of that going on in your life. Agreed? The good life is more about the engagement, finding your signature strengths, what you're into, and going with it. This is a picture of a kid playing soccer, and just being totally absorbed in it. And then the meaningful life is, how can you use your particular skills in the world to help people through or to even help yourself? And these three things have driven a lot of this. We talked about forgiveness already. 2-3 weeks ago, we talked about forgiveness. Let's go through the basics. How about the free three? Have we talked about this in here? So look, man, and especially music. I've been monitoring myself related to the intake of music, and when I don't have the right amount of music in it, it puts me in a real bad mood. And I found you guys are gonna be happy. I found a new genre of rap too that I'm kind of into. What are you talking about, Carolyn? It's freaking awesome. Maybe we'll do like a diss battle in here or something like that. So whatever type of music you like. Now we recommend upbeat, kind of get it going, but whatever you're into, daily listen to music, daily find something to laugh at, and daily go outside. And try those three things for 30 days. That's been shown to improve moods. Flow we've talked about already, guys. This is all the engagement stuff. This is finding the stuff that zones you in. A lot of times when they talk about flow, they do talk about extreme athletes because it's the best example of that. If you want to have a shout out at a resource, it's Jason Silva. If you go to YouTube, if you go to Jason Silva, S-I-L-V-A, if you go to his page, he has a series called Shots of Awe. And he talks all about this stuff. And he'll even send you on some where you can go get some other videos and stuff about this. This is this idea of tapping into, and when you think about awe or the word awesome, where do you go and what scenes in your life can you think of and be whoa, that's amazing. And you get that feeling inside. A lot of times it's nature, right? A lot of people will report it's the beach or it's the Grand Canyon or whatever. That doesn't work for me at all. I have no desire to go look at that stuff. I don't get it. Bugs everywhere, hot, But I get awe-inspired when I watch sporting events that are amazing performances. Michael Jordan's 63, Mario Lemieux scoring a goal, all 5 different ways that you can. Anything that makes you go, whoa, that's this idea of a sense of awe. Also, it creates into building the flow. I want to pop to another thing here. Here we go. 3 good things. Have we talked about this in here? Hey, here's the research on 3 good things. It's really interesting. You have to do 3 good things in a certain way to maximize the benefit. Remember, our brain is wired to notice bad things. Agreed? We've talked about that already. You are preconditioned to notice all the bad stuff that's going to happen to you the rest of tonight and tomorrow. It keeps you alive. It keeps you on your toes. So you have to make your brain notice good stuff. Now the good news is refire to rewire. If you do that, your brain will start to automatically pick up good stuff. So here's the assignment. Every day for 30 days, you have to write down 3 good things that happened to you. They have to be very specific and they cannot repeat themselves any days. So in the course of a 30-day period, you have to find 90 different good things. And if you really want to do it the right way, you take your money, you put it in the bank, and you designate your money to go to a political candidate that you don't necessarily like if you do not accomplish this. Because that motivates you to get it done. And here's what's going to work. What's going to work is you making yourself find these things. Do you follow the principle here? So the first 5 days, you'll be making yourself notice it. The next 5 days, you'll be making yourself notice it. Then what will happen is your brain will be rewired, and you will start noticing good things. And years later, you will notice good things. To this day, I did this when I got coached up in positive psychology. The reason I'm passionate about positive psychology, it was very important to me in my life. Drexel University in Philadelphia was where my guy was from. And then also the University of Penn, that's in the Philadelphia area. Basically, when you do that, I'm telling you, recondition your mind to notice the good things. Because I will still do it today. I haven't actively done 3 good things, but I will still do it. I'm going to tell you where it happens to me is on Route 85. If I go to Route 85, or Interstate 85, it's called Interstate down here, right? I was calling it Route, and apparently that's wrong. Interstate 85. If I go Interstate 85 and there's not a traffic jam, I mean, it's like I won the frickin' lottery, man. It is a hope shot from God. And I'm like, good thing, good thing, good thing. And so, can you see the benefits of that around the process? The other thing that you can do, it says 5 good pictures. It doesn't have to be 5. You literally can do it with 1. So when you smile, you release a chemical in your brain called oxytocin. It's the feel-good chemical. It's the love chemical. It's the neurotransmitter that makes us have empathy for other people too. And when you smile, it's literally connected to the muscles in your face. So one of the things that you'll do for people when I worked in psychiatric units and stuff is when they would come in, we would make them hold a pencil in their teeth. This is back like 2001 before we knew anything. It was just this idea of the smile, the forced smile, right? So a way that we recommend doing it now is take 5 good pictures and put them up front in your phone. And as you scroll through them, you'll smile. Now, I might not smile if I looked at the pictures because I wouldn't know the story, right? But if you put the right pictures there, you'll smile. Have you ever seen anybody looking through a photo album? You guys know what a photo album is? Back in the day when you had pictures and this thing, you open it up, it was called a book. You got to go to the next page. If you watched anybody doing it the whole time, they're smiling and they're talking to you like, Donald, you remember? That is very healthy. That is very healthy. All you're doing is you're looking for little tricks to kind of ride that out. I'm fortunate because literally work for me is the flow state. I cannot believe it is 8 o'clock. I literally feel like I've been up here for 13 minutes at the most. This is my jam. So I'm very fortunate that I get to do this and I can have that type of experience. It wasn't always the case, right? It wasn't always the case for me in my work. You might have to look. But here's your choice, right? So we cannot, if we had a magic wand, I would take away the pain, suffering, and the issues for your loved one tonight. If we had another option or another area that we could send them to, other things, other places that they could try, I would give it to you tonight. I would say, let's get them there. Let's do it. We can't change the cards we're dealt right now. You're literally standing, you stand at a moment in time where you have a fundamental choice. I'm gonna let this stuff eat me up. And here's the deal, it will eat you up. It's what it does. The worry will never stop. The stress will never end unless you actively and aggressively chase it yourself. Now, I'm telling you one model with positive psychology. You may be able to get the same type of thing from Al-Anon. You may be able to get the same type of thing from a therapist. You get where I'm coming from? It doesn't matter where you get it from. But the idea is, where can you go and who can you talk to? That it's not going to be about your loved one. It's going to be about you. And it's not going to be, like when people ask you, how are you doing? Don't tell them how your loved one's doing. Tell them how you're doing. That's what you're looking for. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, good deal. Thank you very much for being here tonight. We are going to close this thing with the Serenity Prayer. If we get a moment of silence for those still suffering, followed by the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right. Good deal.